Let me say this right at the start. If you think this crisis is calming down, you are looking at the wrong picture. Because what happened in the last 24 hours does not look like a clean step toward peace. It looks like something much more dangerous, a ceasefire that exists on paper, a negotiation track that is wobbling, hardliners inside Iran openly attacking the extension, and a political system in Tehran that is showing signs of stress at exactly the moment the world wants stability. Reuters reported on April 22nd that President Trump announced an indefinite extension of the ceasefire, but it was not clear whether Iran or Israel agreed to it, and Iran's reaction was openly skeptical. And that is where this story gets serious, because the headline is not just whether the deal failed. The real question is this: what happens when one side says the ceasefire is extended, the other side says it never asked for that extension, hardline voices call it a trick, and everyone keeps acting like diplomacy is still alive anyway? Reuters reported exactly that divide, with Iranian officials and advisors framing the extension as a possible ploy, while Pakistan continued trying to keep the talks on track. That is not peace. That is a truce balanced on mistrust, and mistrust is where wars restart. Now here is what we actually know. The U.S. announced the ceasefire extension just hours before the previous window was about to expire. The stated reason was to allow more time for negotiations, with Pakistan still trying to mediate. But Iran did not rush out to bless that move. Reuters reported that Iranian officials responded skeptically, warning that Tehran had not requested an extension and signaling that continued U.S. pressure, including the naval blockade, remained unacceptable. That matters for one simple reason. A ceasefire only works when both sides believe it serves their interests. And right now, Iran's public messaging does not sound like a country that feels safe under the current arrangement. It sounds like a country that thinks the other side is buying time, shaping the narrative, and trying to hold on to military pressure while rebranding it as diplomacy. One advisor to Iran's lead negotiator called the extension a ploy to buy time for a possible surprise strike, according to Reuters. Now stop there for a second. Because once a ceasefire is described in those terms by voices close to power, the issue is no longer whether talks technically continue. The issue is whether anyone inside the system still believes the process is honest enough to sustain. And this is where the IRGC angle starts to matter. I have not found a credible Reuters report saying the IRGC as an institution formally announced, "We reject the ceasefire extension." But Reuters has reported something arguably more important. Iran's leadership has been showing visible internal fractures since the war began, with hardliners and pragmatists pulling in different directions, especially after the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the wider shock to the system. Reuters also reported before the war that the CIA had assessed Khamenei's death could empower hardline IRGC elements in a succession struggle. That is the deeper story. Not one dramatic press release, a struggle over who gets to define Iran's next move. And when you put that together with today's rhetoric, the picture becomes a lot more unsettling. You have a US-announced extension that Iran did not clearly embrace. You have advisors close to the Iranian negotiating camp openly attacking the move. You have Pakistan still saying it hopes talks can continue in Islamabad. And in the background, you have a post-Khamenei Iran that Reuters has already described as fractured, angry, and divided between those who want to manage the crisis and those who think compromise itself looks like weakness. That is not a stable formula. That is the kind of formula where a ceasefire can exist in the morning and be politically hollow by night. Now let's talk about the word coup, because this is where people need to be careful. There is a big difference between a confirmed coup and a system under internal strain. A confirmed coup means a documented move to seize power. That is not what I found in reliable reporting. Reuters reported on March 11th that U.S. intelligence assessed Iran's government was not at risk of collapse anytime soon. But Reuters also reported on March 7th that cracks had emerged in Iran's leadership under the strain of war, exposing friction between hardliners and more pragmatic factions. In other words, no confirmed coup, but very real instability inside the ruling structure. And honestly, for the region, that may be dangerous enough, because a government does not have to be overthrown to become unpredictable. Sometimes the most dangerous phase is not collapse. It is competition inside the state, competition over who speaks for the country, competition over whether negotiation is betrayal, competition over whether more war creates leverage or disaster, competition over whether survival now means restraint or escalation. That is where Tehran appears to be right now. And that is why this story feels so dark, because the outside world is watching the ceasefire. But inside Iran, the real fight may be over what kind of state survives this war. Reuters has already reported major shocks to the Iranian system in 2026. The death of Khamenei, heavy bombardment, the killing of top IRGC figures, including the head of the Guards Intelligence Organization, and deep public and elite stress under the pressure of war. Those are not normal conditions for coherent decision-making. Now imagine what that does to diplomacy. If you are a negotiator trying to work a deal through Pakistan, you are not just talking to a foreign adversary, you are also negotiating against the internal politics of your counterpart. And right now, Iran's internal politics look brutal. Pakistan says it still believes Iran will come back to talks. Trump says the ceasefire is extended. Iranian officials say no final decision has been made under current pressure. And voices around the Iranian negotiating camp are publicly warning that the U.S. move could be cover for another strike. That is what Reuters is reporting today, so ask yourself, if even the diplomatic track is being described in Tehran as a possible trap, how much room is really left for compromise? Not much. And that is why this may feel like deal fails, even before any formal collapse is announced. Because in real wars, deals do not only fail when someone signs a rejection. They fail when the political ground underneath them gives way. They fail when the people who must sell them internally lose the argument. They fail when hardliners define delay as surrender. They fail when every diplomatic gesture is reinterpreted as deception. They fail when the pause becomes just another battlefield. That is exactly the danger here. And now add the military dimension back into it. The ceasefire was supposed to create space for talks. Instead, it now sits alongside a continued U.S. naval blockade that Iran views as an act of war, according to Reuters. Iran has made clear that pressure and negotiation cannot continue indefinitely in parallel without consequences. Washington, meanwhile, has kept the pressure on while also talking up peace. That is a contradiction no one should underestimate, because coercion plus diplomacy can work, but only if both sides think the alternative is worse. And right now, some of the most powerful voices around Tehran appear to think accepting the current setup would look like surrender. Reuters quoted a senior Iranian official saying Tehran would not enter talks that resembled surrender and would only engage if the U.S. stopped its policy of pressure and threats. That line tells you almost everything. It tells you the internal argument in Tehran is not just tactical, it is psychological. It is about humiliation. It is about regime legitimacy. It is about whether backing down under visible pressure would weaken the state more than prolonging the crisis. And that is how ceasefires die. Not always from one giant explosion. Sometimes from pride, factional pressure, and the fear of looking weak. Now here is where the Tehran power struggle becomes bigger than Iran. If the political center inside Iran is fragmented, then every regional actor has a problem. Pakistan has a problem because mediation becomes harder when the other side may not be speaking with one voice. The United States has a problem because coercion becomes less predictable when internal Iranian factions are competing to prove who is tougher. Israel has a problem because strategic signaling gets much murkier when the adversary's internal balance is shifting in real time. Reuters has reported throughout this war that hardline IRGC influence was a serious concern after Khamenei's death. And the global economy has a problem because every extra day of uncertainty around Hormuz, sanctions enforcement, and ceasefire credibility feeds instability into energy markets and shipping. Reuters has repeatedly linked the war and the ceasefire uncertainty to severe global economic disruption. So no, I cannot tell you that a confirmed coup has begun in Tehran. That would go beyond the evidence I found. But I can tell you something that may matter just as much. The political conditions that produce wild decisions, fractured messaging, hardline backlash, and dangerous escalation are clearly there, and you can hear them in the language. The US says extension, Iran says we didn't ask for it, Pakistan says stay hopeful, Iranian hardline voices say it is a trick, Reuters says the leadership is fractured, US intelligence says the regime is not about to collapse. All of that can be true at the same time. That is what makes this moment so dangerous. Not clarity, confusion. Confusion inside a war. Confusion inside a ceasefire. Confusion inside a state that has already lost its supreme leader and taken major hits to its elite security apparatus. Reuters has reported both the death of Khamenei and the later killing of the IRGC intelligence chief during this conflict, and if you want the blunt version, here it is. This does not look like a clean diplomatic off-ramp. It looks like a power struggle wrapped inside a negotiation, wrapped inside a ceasefire, wrapped inside a war. That is why the next move matters so much. If Iran comes back to Islamabad with conditions, the talks limp on. If hardliners keep undermining the extension, the truce may remain technically alive but politically dead. If one side interprets the other's hesitation as weakness, pressure will rise again. And if the people with guns inside the system decide diplomacy is no longer serving them, then the biggest danger will not be the collapse of a single deal. It will be the collapse of restraint. That is the part people should be watching tonight. Not the social media fantasy version, not the instant coup-confirmed version, the real version, a wounded state, a shaky ceasefire, hardline backlash, leadership fractures, and a negotiation process that may be running out of trust faster than it is gaining time. So here is the bottom line. The deal has not clearly succeeded. The ceasefire has not clearly failed. The IRGC has not formally announced a total institutional rejection that I could verify. And there is no confirmed coup in Tehran from the reliable reporting I checked. But the deeper story is still alarming, because the extension is disputed, the hardliners are loud, the internal fractures are real. And if Tehran's power struggle keeps intensifying, the next phase of this crisis may not begin with a public declaration. It may begin with one side realizing that the people shaping Iran's decisions no longer believe the pause is worth preserving. And once that happens, the ceasefire will not need to officially die. Everyone will know it is already over.